So something else I really need to say about grand juries is that with grand juries in place, you would not need such things as a centralized intelligence agency, a federal bureau of investigations, or a national security agency. All of these were created well after the fact. The FBI in 1908, the CIA in 1947, and the NSA in 1952 by a secret act. The government doing all these things in secret, it does not actually bode well for us. And the reason why, though, they were created was it was ostensibly justified, one, for military purposes, for military espionage and so on, which, if that were the case, then it should have just been done as a proper arm of the military itself under the president's role as commander-in-chief through the Secretary of War. And so the Secretary of War could certainly have intelligence and information about enemy troop movements, supplies, yada, yada, right? So that was already provided for under the original Constitution. And so the creation of these agencies was in part ostensibly to fulfill a military role, but also predominantly, especially with the FBI and the CIA and later on the NSA, was for domestic espionage and just basically spying on citizens. And they assumed a more investigative and prosecutorial role. But if you look at the original powers of the government in that regard, there were only these four branches, only four heads in the cabinet, namely the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War, and the Attorney General. And the Attorney General didn't actually have a prosecutorial role. He was just an advisor to the president. And there did need to be prosecutors at some level to do the attorney work of the government whenever they go to enforce the laws. But importantly, there was never a prosecutor who had authority in himself to try people for a serious crime, only for petty crimes. Those could be charged by way of what's called information, and the grand jury would charge by way of indictment or presentment for more serious crimes. And so what you're seeing is the government, through these intelligence agencies, usurped the role of the grand jury and centralized the information that the grand juries were supposed to be gathering in secret. And you see, the grand jury model is a decentralized intelligence agency, and that is actually one of its greatest strengths, is because no one in the government actually knows that they're being investigated when the grand jury has got their eyes on them and when they are actively investigating a crime. And so when you have that secrecy for the grand jury, then the grand jury can actually be effective in its role in rooting out corruption rather than becoming a part of it. And the tenure of the grand jury is also important because they were appointed for a term usually no more than 18 months, shorter than practically any government officer, but it was long enough that they could conduct a longer term and larger scale investigation if needed. So you see the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all these intelligence agencies that have practically become domestic espionage and terrorist agencies that have weaponized government power against the people. They're actually filling a vacuum that was originally filled by the grand jury. Ordinary people like me and you who just, your number got called up that says, hey, you're going to go serve on a grand jury for 18 months. Oh, okay, right? And you meet once in a while. It wasn't an everyday thing, but you would go and gather data. You would go and hear witnesses. People would complain to you and say, hey, I have evidence of this crime. And you would go investigate it. And that way, it was more public. It was more transparent. Kash Patel just went online saying, I'm going to have the most transparent FBI ever. That's a lot of baloney. The grand jury system was extremely transparent to the American people and very accessible because you could always just find your grand jury panel and just go complain to them if you had witnessed a crime. And they could also go and proactively investigate these crimes of themselves. There never was a need for a centralized intelligence agency or an FBI. And the only constitutional provisions that have been cited that I'm aware of to defend the creation of these is Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause. That's kind of mush. You have these roles of government, but you can only do these things if it's actually legitimate. And so having these federal prosecutors and investigators for serious crimes, that's not legitimate. That's the role of the grand jury. The role of the grand jury has been usurped by these intelligence agencies and then just the executive power. So, I mean, commander-in-chief and stuff, and that's just more military stuff.